Ethan Matthews contemplated the city of San Francisco from the heights of his Nob Hill penthouse, a glass of whiskey in his right hand and a Cuban cigar in his left. The fog hanging over the bay was beginning to dissipate, revealing the skyline he loved so much. At 35, Ethan was the picture of success. Young, wealthy, and influential in the competitive world of Silicon Valley. He always liked to think of himself as the living example of the American dream. Born in the Midwest to a middle-class family, Ethan arrived in Silicon Valley with a Stanford degree and unwavering ambition. 10 years later, he was at the top of the corporate hierarchy as the executive vice president of one of the largest tech companies in the world. "Another day, another million," he murmured with an arrogant smile, watching the sun rise behind the skyscrapers. His phone vibrated, interrupting his moment of contemplation. It was Sarah, his assistant. "Mr. Matthews, remember that today you have a scheduled visit to your rental properties." Ethan rolled his eyes. His real estate portfolio was a lucrative investment, but he hated dealing with tenants. "Sure, Sarah. I'll be there in an hour," he replied unenthusiastically. He took the last sip of whiskey, extinguished the cigar, and headed to his closet, which was almost the size of an apartment. He chose a tailored Italian suit and a silk tie. Appearances were everything, especially in the business world, he thought. Even if it was just to meet potential tenants, he wouldn't dress any less than the successful man he was. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like to support the content, and join me on this journey full of twists and turns. On his way to the Mission District, Ethan, settled in the back seat of his car with a driver, was scanning the financial reports on his tablet. His team had exceeded quarterly targets by 20%, and he was about to be promoted to CEO. This anticipation dominated his mind, overshadowing any other concerns. The car stopped in front of a recently renovated Victorian building, one of the gems in his real estate portfolio. Sarah was on the sidewalk, tablet in hand and the usual professional smile on her face. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews. We have 3 visits scheduled for today. The first family should arrive any moment now," she informed him. Ethan nodded distractedly, looking around. The neighborhood was changing. Artisan coffee shops and modern art galleries were popping up in place of the old corner stores and family laundromats. To him, this was progress in action. "What's the profile of the first family?" he asked, adjusting his tie. Sarah hesitated for a moment before responding. "An African-American family, sir. The father is a doctor, and the mother is a university professor. They have 2 teenage children." Ethan frowned. "A doctor, huh? Let's see if they can really afford what we're asking," he commented with a tone of doubt. Sarah looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A few minutes later, a luxury sedan parked in front of the building. A well-dressed family emerged from the vehicle. A middle-aged man with a firm posture, an elegant woman, and 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl. Ethan forced a smile that barely reached his eyes. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Ethan Matthews, the owner." The man shook his hand firmly. "Dr. Marcus Johnson. This is my wife, Angela, and our children, Michael and Zoe." Ethan noticed the confidence in Dr. Johnson's gaze, which unsettled him slightly. There was something about this family he couldn't quite define, but it made him feel a subtle disconnect. "So you're interested in the mission?" he asked as he led them inside the building. "It's a neighborhood that's going through great changes. Many opportunities." Angela smiled, but her tone was neutral. "Actually, I grew up around here. It's interesting to see how everything is different now." As Ethan led them up the stairs to the apartment, her comment echoed in his mind. Although she hadn't directly said it, he sensed that the interesting she mentioned wasn't exactly a compliment. Upon reaching the apartment, he began his sales pitch, highlighting the recent renovations, the prime location, and the modern appliances. However, when he mentioned the rental price, He found himself focusing more on Dr. Johnson, watching for his reactions, as if he were expecting a sign that this family didn't belong there. "Of course, we require a pretty thorough credit check and a 3-month rental deposit," Ethan said with a faint smile, insinuating doubt about their ability to meet the requirements. Dr. Johnson, however, remained unfazed. "No problem, Mr. Matthews. We have all the references and financial documents ready." The visit was marked by a subtle tension, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. In the end, Ethan was eager to wrap up the meeting. "It was a pleasure meeting you. We'll be in touch as soon as we've made a decision." Marcus Johnson smiled slightly. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Matthews. I'm sure we'll see each other soon." As the Johnson family prepared to get into their car after the visit to the apartment, Ethan, already irritated by Marcus's confident demeanor throughout the meeting, couldn't hold back any longer. He approached quickly, his voice laden with disdain. "Look, I'll be direct with you. This neighborhood is changing, and I don't think you fit in here. Doctors or not, it doesn't seem like you understand the kind of standard we're setting with these renovations." Angela, surprised, tried to intervene, but Ethan interrupted her, raising his voice. "If you want something more affordable, you might try a few blocks to the south. Here, it's for those who can really keep up with the pace of the new city." Ethan pressed on, his voice filled with contempt and frustration. "Do you really think you can fit in here? This place is changing, and it's not for those who are stuck looking at the past," he said, with a cold smile. Marcus remained firm, but Angela, visibly unsettled, stepped forward. "We belonged to this neighborhood long before you even knew it existed," she replied with controlled calm. Ethan interrupted her, his voice rising. "Belonging? It's not about that. It's about who can pay. This place is for those who truly know how to keep up with progress." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the awkward glances of Michael and Zoe, who avoided their father's gaze, feeling the weight of humiliation. Marcus took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure, and replied firmly, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Matthews. I think it's clear there's no room for conversation here." With that, he got into the car, leaving Ethan alone on the sidewalk, feeling a bitter satisfaction, as if he had reaffirmed his dominance, even knowing that something about that victory felt wrong. As the family drove away, Ethan noticed one of his neighbors watching the scene from a distance. Their eyes met briefly, and the man's discomfort reflected something Ethan couldn't name. He felt strangely exposed at that moment. "Sarah," he said, turning to his assistant, "I think we can cross this family off the list. I'm not sure they would fit in well here." Sarah jotted down a note on her tablet, although her expression showed a mix of disappointment and resignation. Ethan ignored it and returned to the car, trying to shake off the unease he felt since the arrival of that family. He was a businessman, and decisions needed to be made with the head, not the heart. And if those decisions sometimes felt uncomfortable, well, that was the price of success, he thought to himself. What he didn't know was that that seemingly insignificant meeting would shake the very foundations of the world he had built. The humiliation that Marcus, Angela, and their children suffered at the hands of Ethan did not fade easily. At home, the impact was deep and personal. Michael, the eldest son, was furious, feeling a mix of helplessness and shame for not having defended his family. For him, that moment crystallized a harsh reality. Even with his parents' success, they were still seen as outsiders in a neighborhood that was, to Angela, her childhood home. Zoe, the youngest, became more introspective, carrying the weight of the embarrassment she felt when Ethan scorned them in public. She avoided talking about the incident, but Angela saw the pain in her daughter's eyes. Angela, in turn, felt torn between anger and sadness. Seeing the neighborhood where she grew up being distorted and transformed to exclude people like her was hard enough, but being directly confronted and disrespected by someone like Ethan was devastating. Marcus, who had always maintained a calm and controlled demeanor, felt the humiliation deeply, but he knew he couldn't let it define them. At the same time, He wondered how to protect his family from such attacks in the future. In the silent moments of the night, when they were gathered around the dinner table, the sense of defeat hung in the air, yet the bond of the Johnson family grew stronger. They knew they would need to face situations like this again, but together, they were determined not to let anyone belittle them again. Angela Johnson grew up in the heart of the Mission District when the neighborhood was still a vibrant and united community, before the waves of gentrification began to transform the area. The daughter of a seamstress and a factory worker, Angela learned early on the value of hard work and education. The public school in the neighborhood was modest, but she stood out as a student, always determined to exceed the limited expectations imposed by her surroundings. For her, the Mission was not just a place, but a symbol of resilience and community. When she earned a scholarship and later became a university professor, the desire to give back was always present. Marcus, on the other hand, grew up in a smaller town, in a working-class neighborhood where he faced similar barriers. He graduated in medicine after years of sacrifice, overcoming both financial obstacles and ingrained prejudices that underestimated his ability. When Marcus and Angela decided to return to the Mission, it was a deliberate choice. For Angela, it was the opportunity to work in a different field and raise her children in the same place that shaped her, while for Marcus, it was a chance to contribute to a community with which he deeply identified. However, upon seeing the changes in the neighborhood, Angela felt a bitter pain. The place she knew was disappearing, with its roots being suffocated by gentrification, transforming her childhood neighborhood into something unrecognizable. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a mix of anxiety and excitement. Today was the big day. The day the new CEO of TechFuture would be announced, and he was convinced the position would be his. He could already imagine the headlines, "The youngest CEO in Silicon Valley." As he got ready, he mentally rehearsed his acceptance speech. He would talk about innovation, leadership, and how he would guide the company into a new era of success. His thoughts didn't drift to the Johnson family even for a second. To him, the episode from the previous day was already forgotten. When he arrived at the TechFuture office, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Employees whispered in corners, with anxious and hopeful looks. Ethan walked through the lobby like a king entering his kingdom, waving and smiling confidently. "Great day, huh, boss?" said one of the young developers upon seeing him pass. Ethan smiled condescendingly. "Every day is great when you're on top, kid." Upon reaching the executive floor, Sarah awaited him with a tense expression. "Mr. Matthews, the meeting has been moved up. Everyone is already in the conference room." Ethan frowned. He liked to be the last one to arrive, making his grand entrance. But without hesitation, he headed to the meeting. When he entered the conference room, his confident smile disappeared instantly. Sitting at the head of the table, in the spot he believed was rightfully his, was Dr. Marcus Johnson, the man he had dismissed the day before. Time seemed to freeze. Ethan blinked several times, hoping that the scene was a figment of his imagination. But the reality was harsh and inescapable. Dr. Johnson stood up and, with a firm voice, began to speak. "It is an honor for me to be here today. The board has invited me to take on the role of CEO of TechFuture, and I am excited to lead the company into its next phase of growth." Polite applause echoed around the room, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to clap. He was paralyzed, his body immobile while his mind struggled to understand how this had happened. Dr. Johnson continued, "Our next big project will be a significant investment in technology for underrepresented communities. We want to create real solutions for real problems that directly impact these communities." The gazes around the room turned to Ethan, who was notoriously known for not supporting such initiatives. Johnson, however, did not falter. "And to lead this important project," he continued, "I would like to assign Ethan Matthews." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. He opened his mouth to protest, to question, but no words came out. Johnson was looking directly at him, with an expression that mixed professionalism and something more, perhaps a hint of challenge. "I am sure that Mr. Matthews will bring a unique perspective to this project," Dr. Johnson completed, a slight smile on his lips. The meeting continued, but Ethan could barely register what was said. His mind was in turmoil, trying to process how his life had turned upside down in less than 24 hours. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan was the first to leave the room, ignoring the curious looks and whispers from his colleagues. He needed air. He needed to think. In the elevator, alone, Ethan collapsed against the mirrored wall, feeling small and powerless. The reflection in the mirror was no longer that of the confident and powerful man from just hours ago. It was the reflection of a man who, for the first time in a long while, was not in control. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and he quickly stepped out, nearly bumping into someone entering. When he looked to apologize, he came face to face with Angela Johnson, Marcus's wife. For a brief moment, they stared at each other. The recognition in her eyes was instant. "Mr. Matthews," she said with a nod, her voice calm but laden with meaning. "Angela," Ethan murmured, feeling unable to articulate any other words. She studied him for a moment, as if assessing his intentions, before continuing on her way. Ethan stood there, frozen, as the elevator doors closed and Angela disappeared from view. He exited the building, the cool morning air of San Francisco hitting his face. The streets were bustling, but Ethan felt utterly alone. He wandered aimlessly along the sidewalks, lost in his own thoughts. How could this have happened? How had he, Ethan Matthews, the prodigy of Silicon Valley, been reduced to this? The humiliation burned within him, but there was something more, something he couldn't ignore. It was a feeling of discomfort, a silent voice beginning to echo in his mind. As he walked, he found a small park and decided to sit on one of the benches. There, watching the children play, Ethan allowed himself to think about everything that had happened in the past few days. The morning in the park was a moment of reflection for Ethan. He had always been someone who calculated his actions and decisions with precision, but in recent days, everything felt out of control. Dr. Johnson was now in charge of TechFuture, and Ethan, who had always taken pride in being the man on top, was being forced to face a new reality. When he returned to the office, Sarah was waiting for him with her ever-concerned expression. "Mr. Matthews, Dr. Johnson has agreed to meet with you today at 10 a.m. to discuss the project." Ethan sighed, aware that he could no longer avoid that conversation. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, trying to convey calm. "Prepare the TechBridge project documents and let me know when it's time." The hours dragged on as Ethan mentally reviewed what he would say to Johnson. The truth was that he felt unprepared. He knew that his behavior during the property visits in the Mission and his arrogance in dealing with tenants like the Johnsons were not just business. Something deeper was at stake, and now he would be forced to confront it. At 9:55, Ethan took the elevator to the 30th floor, where Dr. Johnson was waiting for him. The CEO stood by the window, looking out over the city below. "Mr. Matthews," Johnson began without turning around. "Please, have a seat." Ethan obeyed, feeling the weight of the situation. There was an uncomfortable silence between them until Dr. Johnson finally turned to him, his penetrating gaze seeming to see through Ethan's defenses. "Let's get straight to the point, Mr. Matthews. The TechBridge project is something the board and I believe deeply in, and I need you to be equally committed." Ethan straightened in his chair, ready for a defensive speech. "With all due respect, Dr. Johnson, I'm not sure I'm the right person to lead this project. I don't have the necessary experience to handle the issues involved." Dr. Johnson observed him in silence for a moment, as if weighing what Ethan was trying to express. "Do you believe this is a matter of experience, Mr. Matthews?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of challenge. Ethan hesitated. He knew he was about to touch on a delicate point. "The truth is I don't know these communities like you do." I don't know what it means to grow up facing certain difficulties. Johnson nodded slowly. You're right. You don't know. But that's precisely why I want you to handle this project. I'm not asking you to understand everything right away, Ethan. I'm asking you to learn. Ethan was surprised by the change in tone. Dr. Johnson wasn't there to attack him, but to open a door, and that door was Ethan's chance to reevaluate his attitudes. He felt the need to be honest. To be honest, I never thought much about these issues before, Ethan admitted, almost in a whisper. I always treated everything as a transaction, a business. That's what I've always been. Dr. Johnson nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Ethan. That's where you're wrong. You can be more than that. And this project is an opportunity for you to start seeing the world differently. There was a long silence as Ethan pondered Dr. Johnson's words. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the idea that he could, in fact, change his way of thinking and acting. Not because it was necessary for his professional success, but because it was the right thing to do. So, where do we start? Ethan asked, with a touch of humility he never expected to hear from his own mouth. Dr. Johnson. Johnson smiled slightly. First, you will visit the places we are trying to help. Not as an investor, but as someone who wants to learn. The change at TechFuture was palpable. Employees who had once been invisible in the hallways now felt part of something bigger. Their voices finally heard in meetings and projects. TechBridge brought a new energy to the office, and people from all areas, especially those who had never had the space to showcase their value, now worked with renewed enthusiasm. The feeling of inclusion spread, and even the CEO, Dr. Johnson, shared an enthusiastic email with the entire company, praising the team for the success of the initiative. We are building something extraordinary together, he wrote, and the credit goes to each one of you who dedicated yourselves to making this happen. The email was met with smiles and applause, but for Ethan, those words felt like a blow. He, who had once controlled everything with coldness and detachment, now felt devastated, on the sidelines of a transformation he should have been leading. The world he knew seemed to be crumbling before his eyes, and for the first time, he realized that the power he so valued was slipping through his fingers. In the following weeks, Ethan began to immerse himself in the TechBridge project. Under Dr. Johnson's guidance, he assembled a team made up of members from different communities in the city. Among the new faces was Jamal Washington, a talented software engineer who had grown up in Bayview Hunters Point, one of San Francisco's least advantaged neighborhoods. I'm looking forward to working with you, Ethan, Jamal said in the first meeting. I just hope we are truly committed to making a difference. Ethan, who was still adapting to his new approach, responded sincerely. I hope so too, Jamal. I'll be honest. I'm here to learn. The construction of the project began to take shape, and Ethan found himself visiting neighborhoods he had only known from a distance or through financial reports. He started to hear the stories of the people living there, their struggles, and, more importantly, their hopes. One of the most significant moments occurred during a community meeting at the Bayview Cultural Center. The auditorium was filled with residents eager to learn more about TechBridge, but there was a certain distrust in the air. Marlene Jackson, a respected community leader, was the first to speak. I've heard about this TechBridge, but the truth is we've seen this before. Big companies come, make promises, and then disappear when things get tough. The murmurs of agreement that spread through the room made Ethan feel the weight of responsibility. He knew he needed to respond to that concern genuinely. Before he could speak, Jamal stood up. Marlene, I understand your distrust. I grew up here in Bayview, and I've also seen many promises broken. But this time, we're trying to do something different. We want to hear you. We want the community to be part of this project. Marlene crossed her arms, assessing Jamal and then Ethan. I'm listening, she said, but her gaze made it clear that she still had doubts. After the meeting, Ethan approached Marlene. I know you have doubts, and I understand where they come from. But I'm committed to this. I'm not here to make empty promises. Marlene studied him for a long moment. I hope you're not, Ethan. I've seen a lot of people talk pretty and then disappear. The difference will be in your actions. Ethan nodded. Believe me, I'm here to do what's right. And I know it will take time to prove that. She gave a small smile. Well, we'll see. But for now, we're watching. As time went on, the TechBridge project began to take concrete shape. Ethan's team implemented technology training programs aimed at local youth, establishing partnerships with companies that created job opportunities. Ethan began to realize that the true impact was not in numbers or financial statements, but in the transformation these opportunities were generating in people's lives. But not everything was easy. Throughout the project, Ethan began to face resistance within the company itself. TechFuture executives who cared more about profit than social responsibility questioned the value of TechBridge. Some viewed the project as a distraction from the company's core objectives. In one of the most tense meetings Ethan had ever attended, he was challenged to defend the project in front of other board members. Matthews, we're spending too much time and money on this TechBridge. I don't see how this fits into our growth strategy, said one of the directors, his tone heavy with doubt. Ethan, now more confident in his convictions, took a deep breath before responding. I understand your concerns, but this project is about more than just financial matters. What we are doing is investing in talent, in potential. It is these communities that will help us innovate and thrive in the long run. And it is the morally right thing to do. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but Dr. Johnson, seated at the head of the table, simply observed with a discreet smile on his face. He knew that Ethan was beginning to understand the true purpose of the project. After the meeting, Johnson pulled Ethan aside. You are learning, Mr. Matthews. But the road ahead is still long. This project will not please everyone, and the challenges have only just begun. Ethan nodded, aware that his journey of transformation was only beginning. The following weeks were intense. TechBridge was starting to gain notoriety, and with that came new pressures. Ethan, now more involved than ever, felt the weight of his decisions. Then the leak happened. Internal information about the project reached the media, and sensationalist headlines began to emerge, questioning TechFuture's true intentions. TechFuture, Social Impact or Pure Marketing, was the title of one headline. The crisis set in quickly. Ethan called an emergency meeting with his team. The atmosphere was tense, but he knew he needed to act swiftly and transparently. We have to be completely open about what we are doing, suggested Jamal. No generic corporate statements. We need to show the real work. Marlene, who was now part of TechBridge's advisory board, also weighed in. And we need to give a voice to the community. Let the people who are being impacted speak for us. No one wants to hear a company defending itself. Ideas began to flow. They decided to open the training centers to the press and the community at large, in addition to creating a series of videos showcasing the direct impact of the project. While the team worked on response strategies, Ethan felt he needed to do something more. Something personal. He knew this was the time to confront his own demons. That night, Ethan wrote an op-ed for the San Francisco Chronicle. In the piece, he not only defended TechBridge but also spoke about his own journey. He admitted his past mistakes, acknowledging that he had acted indifferently to the needs and realities of many people throughout his career. Now, he was committed to change, both in his professional and personal life. The article was published the next morning and quickly became the center of discussions. While some criticized him for trying to clean up his image, others recognized the honesty in his words. Among the many emails and messages he received, one caught his attention. It was a message from Angela Johnson. Mr. Matthews, your journey is a testament to the power of reflection and the willingness to change. Keep moving forward. There is still much to be done." Her words touched Ethan deeply. He knew his journey was far from over, but now, more than ever, he was willing to face the challenges ahead. In the following weeks, TechBridge continued to grow and positively impact the communities it aimed to help. Ethan, in turn, realized that this was not just about leading a project. It was about something much greater. It was about transforming his way of seeing the world and his role in it. And when Dr. Johnson, at the end of a long meeting, told him, "I believe you finally understand," Ethan knew that, even after all this time, he was just getting started. The transformation of TechFuture was evident in every aspect of the company's day-to-day operations. The TechBridge project, initially seen by many as merely a social initiative, began to redefine the organization's DNA. Employees who once felt sidelined or invisible began to take prominent roles in discussions and projects within the company, bringing forth new ideas and innovative solutions. The corporate culture became more open and inclusive, and teams began to reflect the diversity that the company so desperately needed. There was a new energy in the air, and even those who had previously resisted the changes began to recognize that diversity was not just a matter of social justice, but a competitive advantage. The environment became more collaborative, and innovation flourished in areas that had previously seemed stagnant. Dr. Johnson, who had initially taken on the leadership role temporarily, was made the permanent CEO of TechFuture. The board, convinced that he was the only one capable of leading the ambitious future projects of the company, such as global impact initiatives and the expansion of TechBridge, fully trusted his vision. Under her empathetic leadership, the company was consolidating itself as a reference not only in technology but also in social responsibility. For Ethan, however, this new scenario was devastating. He saw the company distancing itself from the principles he believed were fundamental: exclusive focus on financial results and rapid growth. While everyone around him embraced the changes, Ethan felt increasingly isolated, unable to adapt to this new paradigm. What was once his domain now seemed to slip from his grasp, and the feeling of disconnection only grew as he watched TechFuture transform into something he no longer recognized. If this content was useful to you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This way, you help us continue bringing more videos like this.